She begged, "Don't buy the stallion. Claim me, rancher, and I'll ride beside you forever." Daniel Harper had spent his entire life on the ranch, but auctions like today were always a special kind of challenge. The morning sun was just peeking over the hills, casting a golden glow across the dusty arena. Horses of all shapes, sizes, and colors lined up in neat stalls, their soft nickers and impatient pawing creating a hum of energy that Daniel could feel in his bones. Some horses were calm, used to human hands and voices. Others were wild and unpredictable, their eyes darting nervously around the space as if sensing every movement of every person. Daniel walked slowly down the rows, his boots crunching on the gravel. He could feel the excitement and tension building. There was always a mix of business and emotion at an auction like this. People wanting the best horse, wanting to prove themselves, but also wanting to connect. Daniel wasn't here just to buy any horse. He had a vision in mind. He wanted a stallion strong enough to work the ranch, intelligent enough to learn, and loyal enough to be part of his small but growing family of animals. As he approached the end of the row, a hush seemed to fall over the crowd. There, in the far stall, was a black stallion. His coat shone like polished night, and his muscles rippled under the sunlight. But there was something in his eyes, wildness, fear, and a hint of pain. The horse shifted nervously, stamping one hoof on the ground. His nostrils flared and his ears pinned back whenever someone got too close. He was beautiful, no doubt, but Daniel could feel the warning in his stance. This was not a horse that would bend easily to commands or affection. A voice interrupted Daniel's thoughts. "Don't buy him." He turned sharply to see a young woman standing a few feet away, her hand raised as if to shield the horse. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, and her face was serious, almost desperate. The crowd murmured around them, curious. It wasn't unusual for people to speak up at an auction, but there was something urgent in her voice. "Don't buy him," she repeated, her eyes locking on Daniel. "He's not ready. He's scared. He won't be safe if someone takes him like this." He had never seen this woman before. Her concern was obvious, but it was also unusual. Most people at an auction were there to sell or buy. Rarely did someone plead for a horse to be left alone. "Why should I listen to you?" Daniel asked calmly, stepping closer. He was curious now, but he also had a natural caution. He wasn't about to rush into a decision just because someone shouted at him. "Because I know him," she said firmly. "He hasn't had a kind hand in months. People tried to train him, and they failed. They hurt him. Please, don't make the same mistake. I'm begging you." Daniel studied her for a moment. She wasn't acting out of jealousy or greed. She was worried. Truly worried. There was a tenderness in the way she looked at the horse, a protective instinct. It reminded Daniel of how he felt about his own animals. Every horse, cow, and calf was like family. He could see why this woman felt so strongly. "You think you can handle him?" Daniel asked, a hint of a challenge in his voice. "I don't want to handle him," she said, shaking her head. "I want him to trust someone again. He's not mean, he's scared. If he trusts you, he could be amazing. But if you just try to break him, you'll only hurt him. And maybe yourself." Daniel couldn't help but smile slightly. She was passionate, that was for sure. And she was right about one thing. This horse was no ordinary stallion. He had a fire in him, a spirit that would not bend to force. Daniel liked challenges, and he had trained difficult horses before, but he also respected them. This one would be a test. The auctioneer began calling for bids, but Daniel's attention remained on the black stallion and the woman pleading beside him. He could see her hands tremble slightly, and her eyes shone with worry. The way she spoke to the horse, her gentle tone and careful gestures, made it clear she had spent time with him. She wasn't just some bystander, she had a connection. "His name's Shadow," she said suddenly, almost as if reading his thoughts. "Shadow. Please don't buy him if you're not ready to understand him. He'll test you. He'll run. He'll push you to the edge. But if you're patient, if you're kind, he could be the horse of your dreams." Daniel nodded slowly. Shadow, the name suited him. There was a darkness in his coat, yes, but also a strength, a quiet power that demanded respect. Daniel had always believed that the right horse could bring out the best in a rider. Maybe Shadow was one of those horses. The auctioneer's gavel hit the stand, and the bidding began. Daniel hesitated for a moment, considering the young woman's warnings. He could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of the crowd, the energy of the horses. Shadow shifted again, pawing at the ground and tossing his head. He was restless, but Daniel saw a glimmer of something else. Intelligence, awareness, a spark that told him the horse could learn, if guided properly. Emily. Her name was Emily, she had finally told him, watched anxiously as Daniel raised his paddle to place the first bid. She didn't want him to fail. but she also didn't want the horse to be left behind. There was a bond between humans and animals that couldn't always be explained, and she hoped Daniel could see it too. The bidding was tense. Daniel had to think carefully. Shadow was not an easy horse. He would need time, patience, and care. But Daniel had always believed in second chances, both for people and for horses. As the paddle in his hand shook slightly, he made a decision. He would bid. Not because he wanted the horse for himself alone, but because he believed he could give Shadow the chance he deserved. And maybe, just maybe, he could learn something from Emily along the way. As the gavel came down on the final bid, Daniel met Emily's eyes. She exhaled, a mix of relief and apprehension. She had done what she could to warn him, but now it was up to him to prove that he was worthy of the stallion's trust. Shadow snorted softly, as if acknowledging the decision, and Daniel felt a strange sense of connection. The auction ended, and Daniel led Shadow out of the crowded arena. Emily walked beside him, her hand brushing gently against the stallion's neck. "Be careful with him," she said quietly. "He's not a toy. He's not just a horse. He's something more." Daniel nodded, understanding. Shadow wasn't just another animal on the ranch. He was a challenge, a responsibility, and maybe even a companion. And as he looked into the stallion's dark, intelligent eyes, he realized that this was the beginning of a journey he would never forget. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Daniel, Emily, and Shadow walked together back to the ranch, each step bringing them closer to the unknown adventure that awaited. Daniel could feel it in his bones. Life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine, and Shadow would be at the heart of it all. The ride back to the ranch was quiet at first. Daniel led Shadow slowly along the dusty trail, his hand resting lightly on the stallion's neck. Shadow's muscles tensed under his touch every now and then, but he didn't bolt. He was cautious, as if testing Daniel, trying to understand whether this man could be trusted. Emily walked beside them, keeping her distance but keeping her eyes on both horse and rancher. She knew Shadow's temperament better than anyone, and she wasn't sure if Daniel was ready for the challenges ahead. The ranch spread out before them like a small kingdom, wide and open, dotted with barns, fences, and pastures, stretching as far as the eye could see. Horses grazed lazily, birds chirped in the trees, and a soft breeze carried the smell of hay and earth. For Daniel, this was home. But for Shadow, it was unfamiliar territory. The stallion flinched at the noises, at the movements, at the sudden rustling of a distant branch. Emily stayed alert, gently murmuring, "It's okay, Shadow. You're safe now." Her voice was soft, soothing, and familiar, and for a moment Daniel noticed the horse relax slightly under her words. Once they reached the main barn, Daniel led Shadow into a spacious stall lined with fresh straw. Shadow stamped his hooves, tossed his head, and let out a low whinny, clearly anxious but curious. Emily followed closely, stepping inside to adjust the stall gate. "He'll need time," she said quietly. "He's been through a lot, and he's wary of anyone new. But he's smart. Really smart." Daniel studied the stallion. Shadow's eyes were sharp and alert, watching every movement. He wasn't just a horse. He was a thinker, someone who observed and decided when to trust. Daniel could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him. He had taken on difficult horses before, but Shadow was different. He wasn't just testing physical skill. He was testing character, patience, and understanding. Emily began to explain what she knew about Shadow's history. "He was rescued from an abusive situation," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "He had owners who didn't understand him. They tried to break his spirit, and they failed. He ran, he bucked, he fought, because he had to. He survived, but he carries those memories. That's why he reacts the way he does. He's not mean. He's protecting himself." Daniel nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. He had always believed that every horse had a story, and Shadow's story was clear in his eyes. The fear, the hesitation, and the silent challenge. He could feel that this was going to be a long journey, one that required patience and trust, and deep down he welcomed it. Over the next few hours, Daniel and Emily worked together to help Shadow settle into his new environment. They didn't push him, didn't force him into anything. Emily showed Daniel how to move slowly, speak softly, and let Shadow decide when he was ready for contact. At first, Shadow remained tense, his muscles coiled like springs, ready to bolt at the slightest provocation, but Emily's presence seemed to reassure him, and Daniel could see small changes, a softer look in his eyes, a more relaxed stance, a lowered head. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Emily suggested a walk around the paddock. Daniel led Shadow out, holding the reins loosely. Shadow's ears flicked back and forth, listening, watching, and analyzing every sound and movement. Emily followed, keeping her hand ready in case he panicked. Daniel felt his heart beat faster, but he kept calm. Horses could sense fear, and he knew Shadow needed confidence more than control. The walk was slow. Shadow stopped and sniffed the air, raised his head, and then stomped the ground. Every step was a test for him and for Daniel. And every step, Daniel responded with patience. He didn't pull or yank. He simply stayed beside him, letting Shadow feel that he was safe. Emily encouraged them both, offering gentle advice, and occasionally stepping forward to soothe the stallion when he grew tense. By late afternoon, Shadow had started to relax enough to walk steadily beside Daniel without pulling or trying to flee. It was a small victory, but an important one. Emily's eyes shone with pride and relief. "He's already trusting you more than he did this morning," she said softly. "You're earning his respect." Daniel smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. It wasn't just about training the horse. It was about understanding him, connecting with him, and proving that he could be trusted. And in that moment, he felt a growing admiration for Emily. She had devoted herself to Shadow for months, guiding him patiently, speaking to him in a way that only a few could. Her knowledge, her kindness, and her courage were all evident in the way she interacted with the stallion. As the evening approached, Daniel and Emily led Shadow back to the barn. He was tired but calmer, his steps measured and his breathing slower. They fed him fresh hay and water, letting him settle into the stall. Emily stayed with him, brushing his coat carefully, murmuring reassuring words. Daniel watched quietly, learning not just about Shadow, but about the delicate bond between humans and horses. That night, as Daniel sat on the porch of his ranch house, he thought about the day. Shadow was more than a horse. He was a challenge, a companion, and a test of patience. And Emily, well, she was a force of nature. Her dedication, her gentle strength, and her unwavering belief in Shadow were inspiring. Daniel realized that this journey was going to change more than just the horse. It would change him too. Over the next few days, Daniel and Emily continued their careful work with Shadow. They didn't rush him into riding or training. Instead, they focused on trust, letting him eat from their hands, guiding him through the paddock, and rewarding him for small steps forward. Shadow responded to their patience, showing glimpses of the loyalty and strength that Daniel had seen in other great stallions. He was still wary, still cautious, but he was learning that humans could be kind, that they could be partners instead of threats. Emily often shared stories of Shadow's past, explaining the little things that triggered fear or hesitation. Daniel listened carefully, taking notes in his mind, observing the horse's reactions. Every step was a lesson, every movement a clue. He had to earn Shadow's trust, and he was willing to put in the time. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Daniel and Emily watched Shadow run freely in the paddock. His movements were powerful, graceful, and full of life. Emily smiled and whispered, "He's starting to believe he's safe. He's starting to trust again." Daniel nodded, feeling a surge of pride. It wasn't just the stallion's progress. It was a reflection of their combined efforts, their patience, and their belief that kindness could heal even the most fearful hearts. That evening, as they prepared to leave Shadow in the barn for the night, Daniel realized something. He hadn't just bought a horse. He had accepted a responsibility. Shadow was a living reminder that patience, respect, and understanding could overcome fear. And Emily, well, she was the guide, the teacher, and perhaps the spark that would make this journey extraordinary. As they walked back to the house, the stars beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky, Daniel felt a sense of calm and anticipation. Shadow had survived so much, and now he had a chance at a new life, a life where he could trust again, where he could thrive, and where he could become part of something bigger than himself. And Daniel knew deep in his heart that he would be by his side every step of the way. Emily glanced at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "You'll do fine," she said softly. "Just remember, he'll test you, but he's worth it." "He really is." Daniel nodded, understanding that this was just the beginning. The days ahead would be full of challenges, but with patience, care, and respect, there was no limit to what Shadow could become. And in that quiet moment, under the vast expanse of the evening sky, Daniel realized that sometimes the hardest journeys brought the greatest rewards. Shadow was more than a horse. He was a teacher, a companion, and a reminder that trust, once earned, could last forever. The following morning, the ranch was alive with the sounds of activity. Birds chirped in the trees, a soft breeze rustled through the tall grass, and the distant mountains glowed in the early sunlight. Daniel walked out to the paddock where Shadow was already waiting, stamping his hooves and tossing his head. The stallion's black coat gleamed in the morning sun, and his dark eyes were filled with alert intelligence. Emily was already there, her hands on her hips, watching Shadow with a mixture of concern and admiration. She had spent the night thinking about how best to continue the work they had started, knowing that patience and consistency were key. "Today is going to be different," she said softly. "We need to get him used to following, not just walking beside us, but we have to go slowly. He's still learning that he can trust us." Daniel nodded. He understood the importance of taking things one step at a time. Shadow wasn't a horse you could rush, and forcing him would only set them back. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill his lungs. "I'm ready," he said quietly. "Let's do it together." The first task of the day was simple, walking Shadow around the paddock on a loose lead. At first he resisted, his muscles tense and his head high. He stomped, snorted, and even tried to back away. Daniel stayed calm, speaking to him in a soft voice, while Emily stood nearby, offering encouragement. "Good boy," she murmured. "That's it, just walk. You're safe." Gradually, Shadow began to relax. His steps became steadier, his breathing slower. Daniel felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that trust was slowly forming between them. Every small success mattered. It wasn't about speed or power, it was about understanding and connection. After an hour of walking and gentle guidance, Emily suggested a new challenge. "Let's try some groundwork," she said. "He needs to understand commands and follow direction. But remember, we don't force him, we ask." Daniel nodded. He had done groundwork with horses before, but Shadow's history made this different. Emily took the lead, showing Daniel how to use body language and voice to guide the horse. Shadow watched them carefully, his ears twitching, his eyes alert. At first he resisted, planting his hooves firmly and refusing to move, but Emily's patience was unwavering. She stepped forward slowly, gesturing with her hand, and Shadow finally took a tentative step. Daniel felt a thrill of excitement. This was progress. Proof that patience and kindness could work even with a horse who had been mistreated. He guided Shadow carefully, matching Emily's movements, speaking gently. Together they encouraged him to move, to turn, and to respond. It was a slow process, but every small step forward felt monumental. By midday the sun was high, and the ranch was bathed in warm light. Shadow had begun to follow commands more willingly, his movements more fluid, and his trust in Daniel and Emily was growing, but progress was never linear. Suddenly, a loud noise from the nearby barn startled Shadow. He bolted, his hooves pounding the ground as he tried to flee. Daniel reacted instantly, keeping calm and speaking in a steady voice, while Emily ran alongside him, guiding him gently back to the paddock. When Shadow finally stopped, he shook his head and snorted, his eyes wide with fear. Daniel put a hand on his neck, speaking softly. "It's okay, boy. You're safe now." Emily stroked his mane, murmuring reassurance. Shadow trembled slightly, but did not try to run again. "That's progress," Emily said quietly. "He tested you, but you stayed calm. That's what he needed to see. He's learning he can trust you, even when things scare him." Daniel felt a wave of pride and relief. It was exhausting work, but it was worth every moment. Shadow wasn't just a horse. He was a living lesson in patience, understanding, and resilience. And Daniel realized that he was learning as much as the stallion. Over the next several days, Daniel and Emily continued their careful work with Shadow. They introduced new exercises, walking over obstacles, responding to gentle commands, and even simple games to build confidence. Shadow's intelligence and sensitivity were remarkable. He learned quickly, but he also had moments of doubt, testing their patience and determination. One afternoon, Emily suggested trying something daring, riding Shadow together. "He's ready," she said cautiously, "but we go slow. Just light riding, nothing too fast. He needs to trust us on his back, too." Daniel felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Riding Shadow was a big step, one that required absolute trust, but he trusted Emily's judgment, and he knew that Shadow had grown stronger and calmer under their care. They began by leading Shadow slowly around the paddock, with Emily holding the reins and Daniel walking beside him. Shadow was cautious at first, but with gentle encouragement he began to accept the weight and presence of a rider. Emily spoke softly to him, and Daniel mirrored her words, keeping their voices calm and steady. Step by step, Shadow moved with more confidence. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Daniel finally mounted Shadow. His heart raced, but he stayed calm, keeping his movements gentle. Emily held the reins briefly, guiding Shadow before stepping back and letting Daniel take the lead. Shadow's steps were careful but steady. He didn't panic, didn't bolt. For the first time, Daniel felt the full power and grace of the stallion beneath him. Emily smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "You're doing it," she whispered. "He trusts you." Daniel felt a warmth in his chest. It wasn't just about riding Shadow. It was about the connection they had built. The trust, the patience, the care. It had brought them to this moment. Shadow wasn't just a horse. He was a partner, a friend, and a reminder of what kindness could achieve. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between Daniel, Emily, and Shadow grew stronger. They spent hours together every day, training, walking, and riding. Shadow became more confident, his movements graceful, his temperament calm. Daniel and Emily learned to anticipate his reactions, reading his body language and expressions. He was no longer the fearful, anxious stallion from the auction. He was a proud, strong, and loyal companion. But it wasn't just the horse who had changed. Daniel felt himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected, working with Emily, seeing her dedication, and witnessing her patience and understanding. He felt a growing admiration and something more. Emily wasn't just helping him with Shadow. She was showing him the value of empathy, patience, and love. And he realized that their connection was deepening, just as the bond between him and Shadow had grown. One evening, after a long day of riding and training, Daniel and Emily sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset over the hills. Shadow grazed nearby, calm and content. Emily sighed softly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "He's come so far," she said. "And so have you." Daniel smiled, feeling a sense of peace. "We've all learned from each other," he said. "He's taught me patience, trust, and respect. And I think I've learned a lot from you, too." Emily looked at him, her eyes bright with emotion. "We make a good team," she said softly. "Shadow, you, and me. We've built something together that's stronger than fear or doubt." As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Daniel felt a sense of gratitude. Shadow had entered his life unexpectedly, bringing challenges and lessons that he could never have imagined. And Emily, she had become more than just a guide or a friend. She was a partner in every sense, someone who shared his vision, his passion, and his care for the horse they had saved together. The journey was far from over. There would be more tests, more challenges, and more lessons to learn. But Daniel knew that with patience, trust, and love, they could overcome anything. Shadow had not only transformed into a confident, loyal stallion, he had also brought Daniel and Emily closer, creating a bond that would last a lifetime. And as they watched Shadow trot gracefully across the paddock, silhouetted against the glowing sky, Daniel realized something important. True connection, whether with a horse or a person, was built on respect, patience, and understanding. And when it was earned, it could last forever. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of hay and earth across the ranch. Daniel stepped outside, squinting against the bright sun. Shadow was already waiting near the fence, stamping his hooves impatiently. His dark coat shone in the light, and his eyes were alert, scanning the surroundings. Over the past few weeks, he had become stronger, calmer, and more confident, but today would test him in ways he hadn't faced before. Emily joined Daniel at the paddock, her hands resting on her hips as she watched Shadow carefully. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, her voice steady. "We should try riding him in the open field today. He's ready for more freedom, but it's going to be a real test. He's never been out like that before, and he might panic." Daniel nodded. He understood the risks. Shadow was intelligent and strong, but that intelligence came with caution, and sometimes fear. If they weren't careful, the stallion could bolt, throw a rider, or hurt himself. But Daniel also knew that growth required risk. He had seen Shadow's progress, and he trusted Emily's judgment. They led Shadow out of the paddock and into the wide open field behind the ranch. The grass swayed in the breeze, and the landscape stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with wildflowers and the occasional tree. Shadow's ears twitched, his muscles tense as he surveyed the unfamiliar terrain. He lifted his head high, nostrils flaring, and Daniel felt the stallion's energy, a mix of curiosity, caution, and readiness to react. Emily held the reins briefly, letting Daniel approach slowly. "Remember," she said softly, "calm, patient, gentle. Let him choose his steps." Daniel nodded, taking a deep breath. Shadow's trust had grown, but this was a bigger challenge than the paddock. The open space could overwhelm even the most confident horse. They began walking slowly, Daniel beside the stallion, Emily guiding from the front. Shadow's steps were careful at first, his eyes darting to every movement, every sound. But with gentle encouragement he began to relax, his strides becoming steadier. Daniel spoke softly, praising him, while Emily mirrored his words, creating a calm rhythm for Shadow to follow. For a while it seemed as if everything was going smoothly. Shadow trotted lightly, responding to gentle cues. and the bond between horse, rider, and guide felt strong. But suddenly, a noise shattered the calm. A loud clatter from the nearby barn where a pile of tools had fallen. Shadow froze, his ears pinned back, nostrils flaring. Panic surged in his eyes. Before Daniel could react, Shadow bolted, his powerful legs carrying him across the field. Daniel's heart leapt into his throat. He held on as tightly as he could, trying to keep his balance while Shadow ran in wide circles, ears flat and eyes wide with fear. Emily ran after them, calling softly, trying to soothe the stallion. "Shadow! It's okay. You're safe. Stop!" she shouted, her voice firm but gentle. She stepped closer, moving in a way that didn't threaten him, reaching out to guide him back to calm. Daniel struggled to keep Shadow under control. The horse's fear was palpable, yet there was intelligence behind the panic. He wasn't running blindly. He was testing, searching for safety. Daniel's mind raced, thinking of every lesson, every moment of trust they had built over the past weeks. He had to remain calm. Shadow could sense his fear, and any hint of panic could make the situation worse. Emily managed to step closer to Shadow's path, positioning herself to redirect him gently. "Look at me, Shadow," she called. "You're safe. Trust me." Shadow's hooves pounded the ground, but he slowed slightly, reacting to Emily's calm presence. Daniel adjusted his posture, speaking softly, stroking the stallion's neck. Slowly, carefully, Shadow began to respond, his frantic movements easing. After what felt like an eternity, Shadow finally stopped, trembling slightly, but under control. Daniel exhaled, his heart still racing, while Emily gently patted the stallion. "See," she whispered. "You're okay. You're safe. You're strong." Daniel slid off, letting Shadow stand quietly for a moment, and ran to Emily's side. "That was close," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "He could have really hurt himself. Or me." Emily smiled faintly, brushing a hand along Shadow's mane. "He tested us," she said softly. "That's what he does. He needs to know that we'll stay calm, no matter what. And you did well." "You didn't panic." Daniel felt a mix of relief and admiration. Shadow had pushed them to their limits, but in doing so, he had shown just how much he trusted them. The stallion wasn't just a horse. They had created a bond strong enough to survive fear and danger. The rest of the day was spent helping Shadow recover from the shock. They walked him slowly, allowed him to graze, and spoke softly, reinforcing trust with every word and touch. By evening, the stallion was calmer, his movements steady, and his eyes softer. Daniel and Emily knew the day had been a turning point, a moment that tested not only Shadow's courage but also their own patience, skill, and trust in him. As they led him back to the barn, Daniel realized something deeper. Shadow's wildness and intelligence had always demanded respect, but it was Emily's courage and understanding that had made the difference today. She had stepped forward, taken risks, and shown Shadow the safety he needed to calm himself. And in that moment, Daniel understood that his admiration for Emily went beyond respect. It was a bond built on shared challenge, mutual trust, and growing affection. That evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and purple, Daniel and Emily brushed Shadow's coat, speaking softly and stroking his mane. The stallion leaned into their touch, relaxed and calm for the first time since the morning's panic. Emily smiled, looking at Daniel. "He's learning that even when things go wrong, we'll stay with him," she said quietly. "That's a lesson he needs, and I think he finally understands it." Shadow's test had shown more than just his fear. It had shown the depth of trust that could exist between horse and humans, and it had also revealed something about Daniel himself, his patience, his calm, and his willingness to trust Emily in a tense moment. Over the next few days, they continued working carefully with Shadow, introducing new exercises while keeping the lessons of the open field in mind. Shadow became stronger, braver, and more responsive. He tested boundaries occasionally, but Daniel and Emily met each challenge with calmness, reinforcing the trust they had built. The stallion's spirit was untamed, but he had learned that there was safety, kindness, and respect in their presence. One afternoon, Emily suggested they try a new exercise, riding together side by side, allowing Shadow to move freely across the paddock while they guided him together. Daniel mounted first, with Emily following closely, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder for reassurance. Shadow moved with confidence, responding to gentle cues, and for a moment Daniel felt a profound connection. Horse, rider, and guide moving as one. Emily's eyes shone with pride. "Look at him," she whispered. "He trusts us now." "Fully." Daniel smiled, feeling a surge of emotion. Shadow had not only grown stronger and braver, but he had also brought Daniel and Emily closer together. Their shared efforts, their patience, and their understanding had forged a bond that went beyond simple training. They had become a team, united by trust, respect, and a shared love for the stallion they had nurtured. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, Daniel realized something important. Life, like Shadow, was unpredictable and sometimes frightening. But with patience, trust, and courage, challenges could be met and overcome. And in the process, connections could be strengthened, bonds could be formed, and hearts could grow closer. That night, as they settled Shadow in the barn and walked back to the ranch house, Daniel glanced at Emily. She had been his guide, his partner, and his friend through the trials of the day. And he knew that the lessons they had learned about patience, trust, and courage would stay with them forever. Shadow lay quietly in his stall, finally at rest, the events of the day behind him. Daniel and Emily sat on the porch, watching the stars appear in the sky. They didn't speak much. Words weren't necessary. The bond they had created, tested, and strengthened today was enough. Shadow had faced fear and come out stronger, and they had faced challenges together, discovering not only the power of trust but also the depth of their connection with each other and with the stallion who had changed their lives. And in the quiet of that starry night, Daniel knew that the journey was far from over. There would be more tests, more challenges, and more lessons to learn. But with patience, understanding, and courage, there was no limit to what they could achieve together. The sun rose slowly over the ranch, spreading golden light across the fields. The air was fresh and cool, carrying the scent of grass and earth. Daniel stepped outside, stretching, feeling the calm energy of the morning. Shadow was already waiting near the fence, standing tall and alert. His coat gleamed in the sun, and his eyes held a calm confidence that had been absent just weeks ago. Emily joined Daniel at the paddock, her hands tucked into her pockets as she watched Shadow. "He's ready," she said softly. "Ready for more freedom, more trust, and more responsibility. He's changed, Daniel. You can see it." Daniel nodded. He had spent countless hours working with Shadow, training him, guiding him, and most importantly, learning from him. Shadow had tested their patience, their courage, and their ability to trust. But now, he had grown into a strong, intelligent, and loyal stallion, a true companion. Their plan for the day was simple but meaningful. They would ride Shadow together across the open fields of the ranch, allowing him to move freely while maintaining control and guidance. This was not just training. It was a celebration of the trust and bond they had built. Daniel mounted first, careful and confident. Shadow moved smoothly beneath him, his stride steady and sure. Emily followed, her hand lightly resting on his shoulder as she spoke softly to both horse and rider. Shadow responded instantly, trotting in perfect rhythm, ears forward, eyes calm and focused. It was a sight Daniel had dreamed of, a moment of harmony that rewarded all their effort. As they rode across the rolling fields, the wind brushing past their faces, Daniel felt a profound sense of joy. Shadow had come so far, from a fearful, anxious horse to a proud, confident stallion. Every step of the journey had required patience, understanding, and care. And through it all, Daniel had learned lessons about trust, empathy, and courage. Emily rode beside him, smiling as Shadow moved effortlessly across the grass. "Look at him," she whispered. "He's amazing. You both did this together." Daniel glanced at her, feeling warmth spread through him. "We did it together," he said softly. "Not just me, not just Shadow. You too, Emily. I couldn't have done it without you." She looked at him, her eyes bright, and for a moment neither spoke. Words weren't necessary. The bond they shared, built through hours of work, patience, and trust, was stronger than anything words could express. Shadow moved with confidence beneath them, his head held high, muscles rippling with power and grace. They rode through the fields, exploring new trails, crossing shallow streams, and climbing gentle hills. Shadow responded perfectly to their commands, showing not only his training but also his trust in them. Each step was a reminder of how far he had come and how much he had changed. The stallion who had once bolted at the slightest sound now moved with calm determination, confident in the safety and guidance of his riders. At one point, Shadow paused near a large oak tree, sniffing the air and listening to the distant sounds of the ranch. Daniel and Emily stopped with him, patting his neck and speaking softly. "Good boy," Daniel murmured. "You've done so well. I'm proud of you." Emily smiled, brushing her fingers along Shadow's mane. "He's not just a horse anymore," she said. "He's family." Daniel nodded. It was true. Shadow had become more than a companion or a project. He was part of their lives, part of their hearts, and in the quiet of that morning, surrounded by the beauty of the ranch, Daniel realized something else. Emily had become family too. Her dedication, her courage, and her kindness had guided them all, and Daniel felt a deep connection that went beyond words. They continued riding, the sun climbing higher, casting warm light across the fields. Shadow moved with energy and grace, occasionally tossing his head playfully, clearly enjoying the freedom and trust they had given him. Daniel and Emily laughed together, sharing quiet moments of joy as they guided him through the open space. After a long ride, they returned to the barn, leading Shadow gently back to his stall. He nuzzled Emily's hand and rubbed his head against Daniel's shoulder, showing affection and trust. It was a moment of pure connection, a reward for all the effort, patience, and love they had poured into him. That evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Daniel and Emily sat on the porch of the ranch house. Shadow grazed nearby, calm and content, occasionally lifting his head to watch them. The day had been a celebration of progress, of trust, and of the bond they shared. Emily glanced at Daniel, a soft smile on her face. "We did it," she said quietly. "He trusts us. He's strong, confident, and happy. And I think we've grown too. We've learned so much about patience, trust, and care." Daniel reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Yes," he said, "we have. And I think the journey isn't just about him. It's about us too, about what we've built together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear. Shadow lay in the grass nearby, finally resting, the day's events behind him. Daniel realized that the journey had changed them all. Shadow, Emily, and himself. They had faced challenges, fear, and uncertainty, but they had emerged stronger, closer, and more connected. In the days that followed, Shadow continued to thrive. He moved with confidence across the ranch, responding to commands easily and showing loyalty and affection to Daniel and Emily. His past fears were replaced with trust, and his wildness had been transformed into strength and intelligence. Daniel and Emily continued to work with him, not just as riders or trainers, but as partners and friends. They rode together regularly, explored new trails, and shared quiet moments of connection with Shadow. And through it all, their own bond deepened, built on shared experiences, trust, and mutual respect. One afternoon, as they watched Shadow gallop across the field, Emily turned to Daniel. "You know," she said softly, "he's more than just a horse. He's a reminder that patience and kindness can change lives. Not just his, but ours too." Daniel nodded, feeling a warmth in his heart. "You're right," he said. "And I think he's also shown us something else, that love, trust, and care are worth every effort. Even the hard days, the scary days, they're worth it." They watched Shadow for a long moment. The stallion moving with grace and confidence, his coat shining in the sunlight. Daniel felt a sense of peace and fulfillment that he had never experienced before. Shadow had grown into a magnificent horse, but more importantly, he had brought them together, taught them lessons, and reminded them of the power of trust and connection. As the stars filled the night sky, Daniel and Emily sat quietly, hand in hand, feeling the calm presence of Shadow nearby. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every moment. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and challenges, and had come through stronger, closer, and more connected than ever. Shadow, the stallion who had once been fearful and anxious, now stood proudly, a symbol of strength, trust, and loyalty. And Daniel and Emily, having shared the journey with him, knew that they had found something truly special, a bond that would last forever. In the quiet of that night, under the glow of the stars, they realized that life was about these connections between humans, animals, and the world around them. Shadow had taught them patience, courage, and love. Emily had shown Daniel the power of understanding and care, and together they had created a family built not just on blood, but on trust, loyalty, and the shared journey of growth and discovery. Daniel looked at Emily, her face illuminated by the soft moonlight, and smiled. "I think we'll ride together forever," he said quietly. Emily returned the smile, her eyes reflecting the moonlight and the depth of their bond. "Yes," she said softly. "Together, always." And with Shadow standing proudly beside them, the three of them, rancher, woman, and stallion, faced the future with confidence, trust, and a bond that would never break. It was more than a story about a horse or a ranch. It was a story about love, patience, and the power of trust. and it was a story that would stay in their hearts forever.